The adage "you can't please everyone" is ubiquitous. It is contingent upon the identity of the interlocutor. In any given locale, this assertion is uttered on a daily basis. Good morning, everyone. My name is William Baker. I have been married for 26 years, 3 months, and 21 days. I met Julia at a Rick James concert in Cleveland, Ohio, in 1985. She was exceptionally attractive, clad in the tightest jeans I had ever seen at the time. This was my inaugural encounter with the phenomenon of camel toe. I had heard the term, but lacked an understanding of its meaning until I met Julia. She possessed a kind smile and eyes of a striking green hue. Her eyes were reminiscent of a lake at midnight, radiant and alluring. I was immediately captivated. I was initially astonished when I first laid eyes on Julia at the concert. I was accompanied by my brother Harry and cousin Mike. Harry had invited us along because his girlfriend Sarah could only attend the concert if her sisters were present. Sarah was the oldest, while Julia was the youngest. Mike ended up accompanying Martha, who weighed 230 pounds. I was quite intimidated by Martha's size, as I am only 185 pounds. Mike was of a similar height to me, with the exception of Martha, who was notably larger in stature. The evening proceeded without incident, with Mike visibly at ease in Martha's company. Julia and I also enjoyed ourselves. I was disinclined to see the concert conclude, as it had been a highly enjoyable experience. In summary, 6 months later, Julia and I were married. The wedding was a resounding success, with festivities continuing until 6 a.m. At 30 minutes before midnight, Julia and I renewed our vows for the second and third time before departing for our honeymoon. The subsequent 25 years elapsed rapidly. I reached the age of 46 and had 4 children: William Jr., 24, Mildred, 22, Justin, 21, and Hank, 19. I did not particularly care for the names Julia had chosen for her children, but I was amenable to Mildred as it was her aunt's name and the others were derived from her favorite boy band. I was willing to acquiesce to my wife's preferences, as the adage suggests that a mother's happiness is of paramount importance. Julia, who was 45, was a strikingly attractive woman. Many of our acquaintances were incredulous when they learned that she was the mother of 4 grown children. What they failed to recognize was that Julia was a dedicated health enthusiast. She engaged in regular exercise, a balanced diet, and a regimen of fitness activities. I must acknowledge that I occasionally resorted to purchasing pharmaceuticals on the black market to maintain my own fitness level. Our relationship was progressing well until Hank's departure for college prompted Julia to undergo certain changes. She began to desire sexual intercourse with greater frequency, began wearing attire that was notably revealing, and once again began displaying her camel toe. Initially, I perceived her to be more sexually attractive, but then I observed her on her way to work in a black micro miniskirt. I sensed that something was amiss and resolved to ascertain the truth when Julia returned home from work. I motioned for her to sit down, and she looked at me and said she knew what I wanted. She did not have the opportunity to discuss the matter further at that time. "William, I have an engagement this evening, so I will speak with you tomorrow. I am aware that I have caused you considerable distress by misleading you in this way. However, you have 2 options: either accept the situation or move out. If you file for divorce, it will be costly and will have a detrimental impact on the children. I will receive half of the assets, while you will be left with limited resources." Julia's tone was disrespectful, and it seemed as though this was a premeditated decision. Over the past few years, Julia has exhibited a pattern of disrespect towards me. Many individuals believe that if you speak softly, you must be a weak individual. I believe that my need to maintain composure was simply exhausting me, but this was a different matter entirely. Julia must be insane if she believes she can simply go out and come back like I'm a simple man who can be easily swayed. He is sitting there, crying over his beer about his wife having an affair with someone who slept in his bed. That is me. Despite the lack of respect, I could not bring myself to end the relationship. Consequently, for the following year, I allowed her to engage in sexual relationships with other men. Ultimately, she left me. I have never been unfaithful to my partner, and I will not tolerate it from Julia. If you consider cheating or attempting to cuckold me, I will end the relationship. I have previously expressed my views on infidelity, and I will not tolerate it from anyone. You, your partner, and all other relevant parties will be held accountable for your actions. She rolled her eyes and proceeded upstairs to the bedroom. I went to my room and contacted Harry. I informed him of the situation. Harry, I had hoped this day would never come, but if she proceeds with her plan, it will go into effect tomorrow. It was a plan we made in college to save time and money in the event of a divorce. Julia was unaware that we did not own anything with the exception of the house. She owned her car and so on. I did not own the house, it was in Harry's name. Similarly, Harry's house was in Mike's name and Mike's house was in my name. Julia was not involved because Mike married before we did, and the house was my personal property. If we divorced, there could be problems with Mike and Harry's wives. However, we have made provisions for that as well. Hopefully, she will come to her senses and change her mind. After talking to Harry, I heard the front door slam. She had 2 hours to change her mind. After that, it was 8. At approximately 10 p.m. the following evening, Julia finally returned home. Julia was concerned about William's well-being. She attempted to contact him several times, but her calls went unanswered as she drove. Julia reflected on the events of the previous night, attempting to comprehend how William had managed to board the plane. The previous night was the most memorable night of my life. I engaged in sexual intercourse with 3 young men. My jaw and buttocks were sore, but I had an enjoyable fall. It was worth it. How can I assist William? The situation with William must be regularized. Julia loves him, but he is unable to provide her with what she needs. She will retain him until he voluntarily becomes a cuckold. This will be difficult for him, but he is aware that he cannot live without her. He will agree to this arrangement because he loves her. This was Julia's plan, but William had other ideas when she returned home. Harry's car was parked in the lot, and the truck belonging to Harry, Mike and William was parked in the driveway. Julia inquired about the situation, and Harry informed her that the landlord requested that she and her husband vacate the premises. Julia became enraged and attempted to intervene. Harry contacted the police, and when they arrived, the first officer inquired about the identity of the property owner. William raised his hand, and the officer instructed him to return to the truck. Another officer then escorted Julia to a location where she could provide her account of the events in question. William and Harry conversed with the police officers for approximately 10 minutes. The officers then engaged in a brief discussion amongst themselves. They subsequently approached Julia and requested her departure from the premises. Julia inquired as to the rationale behind her eviction, whereas Harry was permitted to remain. The officer informed her that the homeowner had requested her removal. They further clarified that while it was not a criminal offense to evict the owner, the time frame for doing so was not sufficient. If the tenancy exceeded 30 days, Julia could sue the landlord in small claims court. However, she was required to vacate the apartment within that time frame. As her name was not on the title or mortgage, she was obliged to leave. Julia expressed her disbelief to William and proceeded to leave the scene. William then informed her that he would arrive at her mother's house within the next 20 minutes. Julia did not look back, as she was determined to confront William and Harry about the situation. Instead, she went to Harry's house and informed his wife, Cindy, about the developments. Cindy was not supportive of Julia's actions. Cindy did, but she comprehended her. It appeared to her as well that life was eluding her. Cindy contacted Harry via his mobile telephone to inform him of the developments with William and his misguided sense of pride. Cindy conveyed to Harry that the course of a woman's life may occasionally deviate from the expected trajectory and that she might resort to actions that transgress established norms in her quest for self-discovery. Harry listened attentively to his wife's account and then replied, "Cindy, if by breaking rules you imply spending beyond one's means, damaging my vehicle, or resigning from my position and fabricating the circumstances, then I am willing to accept those consequences. If you are referring to engaging in sexual intercourse with multiple male partners, then you are not the woman I married and we should consider separating." Cindy reflected on Harry's recent statements. He was the primary breadwinner, responsible for paying all the bills and had access to the family's financial resources. Additionally, he was the source of her intimate partner violence, which included sexual assault. Despite this, he was also the source of regular sexual intercourse, which occurred approximately 3 or 4 times per week. When Cindy began to feel her physical attractiveness diminishing, Harry would arrive unannounced and engage in sexual intercourse with her. This did not occur frequently, but when it did, she felt a sense of Cindy was on top of the world. They went on vacations all over the world. Cindy thought about it for about 45 seconds. She considered how she would manage without Harry. She shook her head, as if trying to shake off a cobweb. She realized that her life did not pass her by because of Harry. She considered that her life was defined by Harry. Cindy asked Harry what time he would be home. He replied that he would be home in a couple of hours. Cindy agreed, told Harry she loved him, and said goodbye. She then looked at Julia with fire in her eyes. She told Julia to leave. She said that Julia had ruined her life and was now trying to ruin mine. I love my husband. He provides for me financially and has never expressed discontent. He financed our 3 children's education at Cole and assisted them in purchasing their first vehicles. He treats me with respect. Your decision to engage in sexual activity with multiple partners until you reached an advanced age has negatively impacted your life. Did you know William was planning to take you to Spain? Leave my residence immediately or I will join you. Julia began to consider whether this was a misguided decision. She departed Cindy's residence and went to her mother's house. Cindy, on the other hand, was en route to Victoria's Secret. She sought out the most sexually appealing item she could find and purchased it in its entirety. Cindy mumbled to herself, I am not compromising my integrity. She then proceeded to Jay's adult bookstore and procured a bottle of lubricant. 2 videos. Upon entering the house, Harry observed Cindy in a compromising position on the dining room table with a bottle of lubricant in one hand and a bottle of her chocolate in the other. She smiled and stated, the choice is yours. It is evident that Harry had a highly satisfying sexual experience that evening, whereas William did not. He was able to contact Harry until Monday, with Julia safely out of the house. It was now time to implement the second part of the plan. The second part was to make Julia suffer for the pain she was causing him. The pain she was causing him was too much, but William was going to regret his actions. Julia would suffer as much as he did when Julia arrived at her mother's residence, her swagger returning. William would soon realize the extent of his misfortune when she was done. She intended to financially devastate him. A few days later, Julia wondered why William hadn't tried to contact her. She sent him emails and text messages. Julia had left numerous messages for William, who she was certain was aware of them. She considered him to be merely obstinate in her opinion. Julia believed that William could not survive without her at that moment. She was correct in this assumption. William was contemplating the reasons behind his prolonged tolerance of her behavior. Julia's mother questioned how long her daughter had been perceiving life through rose-tinted glasses. Julia's mother was of the opinion that it was time to jolt her daughter out of her fantasy world. Julia, you must acknowledge that life is challenging and that it ultimately leads to death. The inquiry prompted Julia to emerge from her reverie. Julia, do you have a maid? The woman inquired. No, Julia replied. You should get your lazy self over here and clean up. Go to the baby. It's dawn. You have things to do. I hope you'll be home soon, the woman continued. I know you're a slave to your duties. The preceding 4 days had been a veritable ordeal for Julia, who had been tasked with a seemingly endless array of chores, from cleaning to reorganizing. Her mother's relentless demands, coupled with the growing frustration and exhaustion, had reached a breaking point. Julia Baker, the man inquired, his voice laced with a hint of familiarity. Julia, though she did not recognize him, sensed that he must have seen her somewhere before. The man looked at her, so she smiled sweetly at him. He handed her the package and said, You've been served. Julia thought, service what? Julia's mother went outside to check on Julia and found her passed out in the front yard. It was William's divorce papers. Julia's mother turned on the water hose and splashed her in the face. Julia woke up and hissed. Julia looked at the papers and was about to pass out again when her mother splashed her again. Your lack of initiative is astounding. Get up and go inside. Stop napping in the yard. What should I do? Julia inquired. I hold your father responsible for this. He has been coddling you for years. Had we instilled in you the qualities of a mature woman, rather than treating you like a princess, you would not be in this situation. Julia, you are aware of how your father and I grew up. Life on the farm was arduous, with long hours, long days, and short nights. Your father wanted the best for you, so Your mother made sacrifices so that you could have a better life, yet you have shown her disrespect. Your father loved William as one of our sons, and I believe that he would be displeased to learn that you are seeking him out in this way. I listened to you speak of William and how you believe he is responsible for your inability to control your sexual desires. I wanted to come over and physically assault you and then have you removed from my house. You have just released the best thing in your life, Julia. There are millions of women who desire a partner like William. He is a desirable catch, exhibiting traits such as loyalty, hard work, and resilience. Despite these admirable qualities, you have terminated the relationship due to feelings of inadequacy and the perception of advancing age. It is important to recognize that life is finite and that the inevitability of death is a reality we all must confront. If your father were alive, I would have resorted to extreme measures to protect you from his wrath. Instead, I am attempting to provide guidance on navigating the complexities of life at your advanced age. 1 year has elapsed. Julia, an individual who has reached an advanced age, has demonstrated a lack of cognitive abilities. Despite this, she has not been raised to recognize this fact. Julia's preferences are not limited to a narrow range of options. They are not exclusive to those that are perceived as valuable or advantageous. Julia's preferences are not limited to those that are perceived as valuable or advantageous. They are not exclusive to those that are perceived as valuable or advantageous. Julia's preferences are not limited to those that are perceived as valuable or advantageous. They are not exclusive to those that are perceived as valuable or advantageous. Julia's preferences are not limited to those that are perceived as valuable or advantageous. They are not exclusive to those that are perceived as valuable or advantageous. Julia's preferences are not limited to those that are perceived as valuable or advantageous. They are not exclusive to those that are perceived as valuable or advantageous. Julia's preferences are not limited to those that are perceived as valuable or advantageous. They are not exclusive to those that are perceived as valuable or advantageous. Julia's preferences are not limited to those that are perceived as valuable or advantageous. They are not exclusive to those that are perceived as valuable or advantageous. Julia's preferences are not limited to those that are perceived as valuable or advantageous. They are not exclusive to those that are perceived as valuable or advantageous. Julia's preferences are not limited to Julia lost her husband and subsequently engaged in sexual intercourse. However, after the act was complete, she did not return to her residence. Instead, she attempted to return to her childhood home, reasoning that it was her true place of belonging. Consequently, Julia found herself alone. Her mother asserted that Julia had provided Williams with her body, which he had made unclean. She elevated him to a new level, but now she is merely another individual who has lost her sanity and attributes everything to her husband. He is not young, attractive, or aroused, but I have a question for you, dear. Where are your partners now? Julia's mother surveyed the area. She did not see them anywhere. Where is your husband, Julia? William is in that house you referred to as your residence. It would be prudent to consider the possibility that he does miss you, although perhaps not for long. It is likely that he will soon become infatuated with another woman, one with larger breasts and a more alluring posterior, who will help him forget you. However, isn't that what you did to him? You forgot that he was your husband. Now he will not be. Her mother hated talking to her like that, but she needed to make Julia see the real world. She had always lived in her own little world. It is now up to her to realize that life is not so simple. Julia is about to get a dose of reality. Julia and her lawyer sat at a table across from William and his attorney. Julia had hired John Patterson, who was known for helping women get large settlements. She hoped that this would persuade William she hoped he would consent to counseling and reconsider the divorce. John recognized William's lawyer but could not recall where he had seen him previously, so he assumed it was a newcomer. William's lawyer began, "My name is Carl Jacobs. I will be representing Mr. Baker." John felt as though a restraining order had been placed on him. Carl Jacobs was a representative of Jacobs Jackson Beard and Hall of Wall Street in New York City. "Excuse me, my client and I need a minute," said John. The individual representing your husband's interests is widely regarded as the most accomplished divorce attorney in the country, according to the Law Review. He has represented a diverse clientele, including senators, billionaires, and millionaires. In his most recent case, the husband was worth an estimated $12 billion, and his wife demanded half of the marital assets. The attorney, Kyle, successfully negotiated a settlement for the couple, resulting in the wife receiving a Harlem apartment and $25,000. The majority of the attorneys on his staff are former judges, and his personal attorney is a former Supreme Court justice. It is unclear how he can afford a firm of that size. Julia was finally getting worried. She finally realized how badly she had screwed up in the conference room. They were cousins and they did not socialize frequently. The last time they had met was 10 years ago. William recalled that Julia had expressed reluctance about attending the event. They returned to the house where William and Kyle were discussing their upcoming golf trip. "Kyle, I was unprepared for your question. I had considered seeking counseling from a professional, but I was curious about your plans." The client, John, posed a question to Kyle, who replied, "It's simple. Julia will walk out of here with the clothes on her back, nothing more and nothing less." John was unaware that there was no one to negotiate with. Harry owned the house, Julia had her own car and her own checking and savings account, as did William. Therefore, there was nothing left for Julia. She was unaware of this fact. Julia stood up abruptly and exclaimed, "There's no way in hell he can have it all." Julia then expressed her desire to regain custody of William. William was requested to speak with her privately for a few minutes. He looked at Kyle and nodded. Both lawyers then vacated the room. William was then informed of Julia's regret for the dissolution of their marriage and the pain she had caused him. She stated that she was willing to sign over all legal rights to him and that she no longer desired to retain any of the marital assets. She expressed her desire to reconcile with William and stated that she was willing to share him with another woman if necessary. "Please consider this proposal. Do not terminate our relationship without at least attempting to make it work." William regarded Julia. She had always been attractive to him, but now he perceived her as merely elderly. Nevertheless, he still loved her. William instructed the lawyers to return to the residence. "Julia, you must sign the documents. You will receive nothing, no alimony, no pension. If you do, we will not file the documents. They will be stored in a safety deposit box for 1 year. Julia, you have failed to resolve this situation, and you must find a way to do so. You have 1 year to do so, and then you will be dismissed. Do you agree? Julia, you have 1 year to demonstrate your commitment to this endeavor. Once you have signed the documents, you will not be able to revoke your signature." William was at a loss for words, so he remained silent. William and Kyle left, and Julia was happy. She went to her mother's house to retrieve her belongings. After packing as much as she could into the car, she drove home, humming to herself the entire way. William would never regret giving her this opportunity. When Julia arrived at the house, there was a note hanging on the door. It read, "Julia, come in, make yourself at home." Upon returning home, Julia reflected on the note she had received. It indicated that William was planning a special gesture for her. Julia was instructed to watch a DVD, which she did while enjoying a glass of wine. The DVD featured 3 of the most attractive women Julia had ever seen. At the conclusion of the DVD, William made an appearance. He expressed his love for Julia and acknowledged her role as the mother of his children. The greatest love was thus treated with contempt, as though it were nothing more than a mere whim, and the result was a night of uninhibited sexual intercourse with a woman who was not one's wife. As a result of this, one's lover and friend were lost for a single night of uninhibited sexual intercourse. It would be interesting to see whether one's faith in the other could withstand a year of pursuing one's own pleasure, as the other had done. If one could withstand a year, one would return. If not, then one must accept that life goes on. The first month was a living hell for Julia, but she persevered. The second month she obtained a new DVD, which featured William and the same 3 women at the conclusion of the film. William encouraged her to remain resilient, stating that he was supporting her. She heard a woman's voice expressing that she should take the opportunity to leave. William questioned why she needed to do so when she could have all 3 women. Julia wept for an extended period following this encounter but remained convinced that William would return on the 4th day of the 5th month. There was a knock at the door when Julia answered it. It was Kyle. Handed her a letter from William. Kyle looked at Julia and said, "If it's worth it, I'm sorry." Then, Kyle walked away. Julia sat down and cried. That was it. William was leaving her. Julia opened the letter. She said, "As much as it pains me to say it, I'm filing for divorce." She continued, "You lost your way and ruined our marriage for the last 5 months." She elaborated, "I've been screwed in every way possible." She concluded, "All I can say is, damn. I'm tired. You'll find me on the stairs asleep. Kyle provided you with the letter to remove you from the kitchen so that I could gain access if you were to engage in further infidelity. Should you do so, I will take the necessary measures to ensure your accountability. It is evident that you have finally acknowledged the reality of the situation. We will be seeking the guidance of a therapist, despite my reservations about the efficacy of such an approach. I accept responsibility for not taking more decisive action before your departure. I did not anticipate your actions and therefore stated that I would reserve judgment for a period of time. I am currently experiencing fatigue." Julia read the letter once more. It stated that William was upstairs. Julia proceeded to the bathroom and washed her face. She removed her clothing and went upstairs. Julia paused in front of their bedroom door. She hoped that the letter was not a cruel jest. She opened the door and discovered that William was not there. Julia fell to her knees and began to cry. Then, she heard the shower turn off and the bathroom door open. William emerged from the bathroom, wiping himself. Julia was too shocked to move. William asked her, "Why are you crying?" Julia blinked and looked at him again. This was not the William she had married. William helped Julia up, and they hugged for the first time in months. The details of their activities that night are not important, but it is worth noting that Julia walked. The couple experienced a brief period of levity, which lasted approximately 3 days. They engaged in rigorous counseling, which proved beneficial, although it left Julia with the impression that she was constantly on the verge of losing William. Last week marked the couple's 60th wedding anniversary. They went missing for approximately an hour, during which time one of their great-grandchildren discovered them engaged in sexual intercourse in the laundry room. The child would experience nightmares for years to come, witnessing an 83-year-old couple engaging in sexual activity. The inevitable consequence of engaging in sexual intercourse with a couple in which one partner is 60 years of age is that the younger partner will engage in sexual intercourse.